Bienvenue. Welcome everybody for this Medal Day talks and ceremony. The next speaker is the medal winner for teaching undergraduate physics. It's Ken Ragan from McGill University. Ken and I actually go back a long time. We're both from Edmonton. I remember him, I think he was in the school in my brother's class. Anyway, he did his undergrad degree at the University of Alberta. Afterwards, he received his DSc at the University of Geneva in experimental particle physics in 1986. And then he has been at the Department of Physics, McGill University since 1990. His research interests are the area of astroparticle physics and particularly ground-based gamma ray detection. He's a longtime member of the CAP and a past president. At McGill, he has taught a wide variety of courses at both the undergraduate and graduate level, and recently and most frequently, introductory mechanics courses for first-year students. So please, Ken, take it away.
Okay, thank you very much, Manu. And thank you to the CAP. This is quite a signal honor to win this medal. But at the same time, winning a medal about teaching in the middle of a pandemic is somewhat of a bracing experience, as you might imagine. So when Shohini first phoned me, asked to contact me and told me that I'd won this, of course, my first thought was, this is a great honor. I know some fantastic teachers across the country, fantastic instructors, and to be considered in this group is really a tremendous honor. And of course, the very second thought hard on the heels of the first was, man, if they only knew what a hash I was making of it this year, they would probably take it away. So I thought that it might be useful to kind of do a recap of what has happened over the last term. Of course, our teaching world has been turned upside down, and perhaps look for positives in that. And so this is going to be a very personal talk about my kind of progress over the last 4 months, what I've done, what I think has worked, what I think hasn't worked. It's guided by this idea that a crisis is a terrible thing to waste, that in every crisis there is an opportunity, and sometimes it takes crises for you to recognize what the real opportunities and the real positives are. So teaching in a pandemic, are there positives? Those of you who are particle physicists from the 1990s will remember Hinchcliffe's theorem, which is that if the title of a talk or a paper is a question, then the answer is almost always no. This will actually not follow Hinchcliffe's theorem. I think there are positives, although it'll take us a while to get to them. And throughout this talk, I'm going to encourage you at several places to engage through the chat. Of course, if there are questions, then I encourage you to put your hand up, and you can use the hand up feature in the participants list or in the 3 dots beside it. But I'm also going to encourage you to engage through the chat with some of your own experiences over the last term or the last term and a half of teaching online. I think many of us are in similar situations, and of course that means that there are hundreds of somewhat independent experiments being run, and it's always good to know what people think worked, what people think didn't work, and that sort of thing. Okay, so here we go. Here's where I'm coming from for this. I'm an instructor, as Manu pointed out, for 2 one-term, first-term mechanics courses. We call this at McGill the U0 class. And they're Physics 101 and 131, and algebra-based, primarily dedicated for the bio streams, and a calculus-based course for physical sciences and engineering students. And you have to remember as well that something that is a little bit unusual for my colleagues across the country is that these are all out-of-province students. Quebec, of course, is different. Surprise, surprise. And so our programs are 3-year programs because, of course, we have the 2-year SAGEP stream. But at the same time, we run a U0, that is a first-year program for out-of-province students. And so these 2 courses are entirely an out-of-province clientele. That means that in a normal year, these people would all be, to the tune of about 90% or so, would be in McGill residences. They would be physically on campus. Very few of them would be living on their own. often have people in one of these two courses down the hall from them. There would be a natural community, and we're going to see that, that was obviously hugely disrupted by the pandemic. The total enrollment, these are both big classes. The total enrollment is about 1,000 or so. And these are classes that I have tried to put in active learning. I have partially flipped my approach so that I want them to do some of the work in advance so that I can consider and concentrate on some of the conceptual aspects of the work. And at the same time, I built in lots and lots of demos because they're mechanics courses. There are all sorts of demos. There are ballistic pendula and darts and bouncing eggs off of basketballs and things like this one in the lower right, which is a pendulum, a bowling ball pendulum. And those demos are really a key, in my opinion, they're really a key part of the course. And so they're one of the things that I was worried about as we moved online. So that's the context for this talk and my experiences. And of course, others will have very different contexts, but I think some of the things we've learned are probably fairly general. So what did I do to move towards remote instruction? I think, like so many of you, it took a tremendous amount of thinking and a lot of work, and I really went back and looked at a lot of the elements of the course that of the courses actually that I was teaching, and I rethought many of them, and I changed my approach to many of them, and I considered a whole bunch of things down here that I didn't implement, but the top list is the stuff that I did change. And this is one of the places where I'm going to encourage you to put into the chat, and I'm going to even watch the chat from time to time on things that you did in your classrooms because of the change to online learning. And I'd just like to see a sense of how experimental we are as a community. So some of the things I did were that my pre-class preparation, which encouraged students to do advanced reading in the textbook with advanced reading and quizzes, was previously strongly recommended. Of course, even when an instructor says strongly recommended, that doesn't mean it always gets done. And this time I required it. And of course, required here means that there were grades associated with it. So in students' minds, that really makes it essential to do. And so that was a change. My lectures, of course, which were synchronous, the synchronous activities were moved online through Zoom. And I really made an effort to try to pare them down and take out some of the accessory material that I thought was really interesting, but I really feared would be viewed as tangential, and sometimes we just wouldn't have time to get to. So they were pared down. The in-class demos that I was so worried about, we filmed a lot of them. In fact, I filmed about 30 of them. These are very short film clips. They're typically 45 seconds to 2 minutes or so. I often showed them in Zoom while I was teaching, but I also posted them on our learning management system. And I thought that was actually, I think students liked being able to watch them over and over again, although they don't have the same immediacy as an in-person demo. And again, this is something I'll come back to in a minute. The lab activities were a major change for us. Both of these courses are associated with labs. And of course, this is the very first time that students are starting to be confronted with having to think through things like uncertainties on their measurements and repeated measurements to reduce those uncertainties, comparison of measurements with uncertainties. And so I was worried about that. We turned them into at-home activities, and sure enough, I was absolutely justified in being worried about that, because there were some successes, but that was there were also some things that didn't work very well that I'll get back to in just a few minutes. The assessment weightings I made flexible, so I allowed students to choose their own assessment weightings within, of course, certain parameters that I set up, and students very much appreciated that. The assessments themselves, and this is probably the biggest change, were made more frequent and lower stakes. So instead of a midterm and a final exam that together were worth about 70% or so of the course grading, I moved to 5 or 6 low stakes formative quizzes and then a final, and the total weighting was only about 50 to 60%, depending on their choice, the student's choice. But they certainly had more frequent assessments, and these formative quizzes were they were short, but they were every couple of weeks, and we also had some problems with them, and I'll come back to those problems as well. And then finally, of course, tutorials and office hours moved entirely online and on Zoom and Microsoft Teams for, well, Zoom for office hours, Microsoft Teams for tutorials. And I won't talk in any detail about that. I considered other things. I considered pre-recording my lectures. I know many of my colleagues have pre-recorded lectures, and my sense from talking with some of them is that that has not always been an unalloyed good, but it's something I considered and rejected because I really wanted the in-class contact. I considered group work, but I felt that it was probably going to be difficult to form groups and have groups work effectively. And I think in retrospect, that's probably true, although I'm aware of people who have done some of that as well. And then peer assessment for labs, for instance, is something that I thought about, but was not willing to kind of go that far. But I think in future that will certainly be something that I will think about. Okay, so that's kind of what changed. And so where am I? There we go. Things certainly looked very, very different, as you can see. So this on the left-hand side is what my classroom looks like. This is those who are at McGill or have been at McGill will recognize Leacock 132. It's a 600-person classroom. And this is what the class looks like when it's engaged in one of the activities that I get them to engage in, which is looking at a bright light through their finger and forefinger. I should probably ask you all to do it now and see if you can actually see the diffraction patterns that when you get your, there's Manu trying it. Okay, so everybody turn on your videos and humor me and do this experiment, okay? And Manu can tell me how many people are actually doing it. And here it is on the right with some students, of course, engaging and really doing this. And there's Arthur, there's Art doing it, great. And so you can see that some students do engage and do this, but it looks very different. And notice here, 19 pages of them. So I don't know how many actually did engage here, but it certainly wasn't the level of engagement that we see on the left. So things certainly look very different, and they probably looked different, never looked more different than the day that I managed to forget to turn off the annotation from my students. And of course, once one student discovers it, quickly every student discovers it. And within a minute or two, my page looked like this, at which point I just threw up my hands and said, go annotate to your heart's content. And they did indeed. So things certainly look very different. Okay, so what happened? And here again, I'm going to ask you to engage with the chat and maybe put in some of your own experiences about what happened in your classrooms in the latter part of the winter term or the fall term as we moved online. But here's the things that I noted, the places that I noted really substantial differences between the in-person experience and the online experience. First of all, student anxiety levels were absolutely off the charts. And I think talking with many instructors at McGill and elsewhere, I think this is a common theme, that people are much more stressed than they have been in the past, or perhaps more willing to express that stress, I'm not sure. But as an anecdotal measure, I keep my emails, of course, for all of my classes. And in a typical year, for my large class, that's the Physics 101 class, which has about 600 students, I will either receive or write about 2,500 emails in a term. So on average of about 4 emails per student. Of course, there are peaks of students that have many, many more emails and some that I never hear from at all. This year, in the equivalent time, I basically received over 5,000, so double the number of emails. So a huge number of students engaging, many of them with stress levels and telling me about their stress levels, willing to talk about those stress levels. So huge anxiety levels. A second thing that I think was quite an eye-opener to me, at least, was the diversity of the student experiences that were being that were being lived and the conditions under which they were trying to study. So again, my normal cohort, remember, is very largely in McGill's residences. It's a first year cohort. This is their first year away from home often, first year at McGill, first year in res, and that brings with it its own anxiety. But here, the diversity was absolutely amazing. I had students that were in every single time zone in the world. So I polled them about this, and so 24 time zones, and people who were at home, people who were quarantined because they had COVID, people who were dealing with taking care of family members who had COVID, and people who would email me and say, well, a hurricane is about to hit, and typically we lose power and wireless for 3 days. So I can't do my assignment, but I'll see you in 3 days, maybe. And the most touching ones and the most worrisome ones were students who actually emailed from war zones saying, look, I'm in a war zone, our internet is being throttled, I am no longer able to access anything to do with our online learning management system or any of the websites that you send us to. And of course, those people had more serious worries than just their schoolwork, but it was very touching that they were so concerned about their schoolwork. But this whole diversity of student experiences will come back in a minute when I address the issues of kind of equity. Another thing that we noticed was the ability of students to develop some sense of community. So sense of community, I think, is critically important for university students, and it's something that is developed in first year, partially through this residence experience. The fact that they're in res together, they're often in the same classes, and of course they're often sitting beside the same people day after day after day in their classes, and that develops friendships, but also a sense of community. That sense of community is very difficult to develop online, and I tried to spur that and to enable that, but it's really quite difficult. My ability, or our ability as instructors, to connect with students is also more difficult because there isn't that personal interaction. It's not zero, the ability to connect with students, but it's certainly impeded. And student engagement is an issue. The ability, and not only student engagement, but the ability to measure student engagement. And so as an example, here we are in a Zoom session, and there are exactly 2 of us running, so far as I can tell, our cameras, me as the presenter and Manu as the host. The rest of you could easily be off getting a cup of coffee. I hope you are. But you may or may not be engaged. I have absolutely no way of knowing. All I see is a name and a black box. So the ability of us as instructors to measure this student engagement is a real impediment to what we're trying to do. And overall, one of the other notable differences that I saw was overall student performance on assessments. In my case, I think it's actually higher than it has been in the past. That is, the students are doing better on their assessments. Partially, I would ascribe that to the fact that we're giving them more time to do the assessments. They're open book assessments, of course, but that's certainly something I noticed. So that's what happened. And again, I encourage you to share some of your experiences in the chat. And I noticed that there are people talking in the chat, and so we can go back and look at some of this a little bit later. Okay, so that's what happened, and some things, frankly, just didn't work very well. So, I think we have to be honest as instructors and try to learn from this. Coming back to the point I made on my previous slide, these equity issues in terms of access to things that we would hope are universal is a really huge problem. We would hope that everyone has access to a place where they can study, where they can be quiet and concentrate, where they have access to high-speed internet on an everyday basis, where they have access to their own laptop, where they have access to all of that. And what we learned, of course, was that that's nowhere near universal. There were people who were sharing laptops, whose entire families were on the same internet connection, and of course, it wasn't able to manage with everything. People who weren't able to carve out some space at home because, well, for many, many reasons. They're dealing with many people in a household, or they're dealing with their own kids, or they're caregivers to their parents, or for lots of other reasons. So equity issues are a big, big issue. This idea of multiple low stakes assessments, I think in the end was kind of a failed experiment, in my opinion, in the sense that although it technically worked, myself and many of my co-instructors used this technique. What it led to was a huge increase in student stress levels. And partially, I think that is the fact that so many of us used it. In fact, when I talked with Teaching and Learning Services at McGill, which is our pedagogic branch, if you'd like, the people who are the pedagogic experts and often confer with us, they were surprised that so many of us had taken them up on this suggestion to move to low stakes assessments. They didn't really expect us to be as responsive as we were. And the end result was that the students felt that there were assessments simply happening absolutely all the time. In my course, it would be every 2 weeks, but there's 3 other courses. And so there's something happening every single week or every few days. And that added hugely, I think, to student stress. The assessment tools themselves that I used, at least, were sometimes difficult to adapt to our environment. And by our environment, I mean things that are qualitative. We want people to work through technical solutions with some math, whether it's algebra or calculus or something more complicated, and some of the solutions in some of the learning management systems just aren't very adapted to that. And then it's difficult, as I mentioned before, to measure student participation. And it's all too easy for students to be present but not on task. So again, here's a simple example, and that is that there's about 70 of you or so, and I can't tell what 68 of you are doing. So it's really difficult. You may be hanging on my every word. That would be great, but it's actually hard to believe that that's the case. And so it's really difficult to measure the participation. And it's really easy for people to be there, but not really on task. And here's something that I hadn't appreciated, and I think is worth commenting on. My real hope was that as we move to a Zoom world, we flatten the classroom in the sense that we take away the front row seats, or more correctly, actually, that we make everyone a front row student. So we all know from teaching in these sorts of rooms here, like this, that there are front row students that are sometimes a little bit keener, and that there are these people who, stay back in what I call the nosebleed seats. And you wonder if they're multitasking. You wonder if their heart is in it. You wonder if their focus is on the course or on something else. And my hope was that by flattening the classroom, we would actually have everybody having a front row seat. In fact, I think that didn't work. What I learned was that there are front row students. There are those students who are willing to run their cameras, and then by the magic of Zoom, by definition, they are the people I see, so that they get more of my eyeballs and possibly more of my attention, although I'm happy to engage through chat and through raised hands and that sort of thing. But it's not a flatter classroom, it's a differently sloped classroom. And there are students who are front row students because they have the confidence to be on their, be running their cameras, perhaps because they have the technical ability, that is, they're not fighting, bad Wi-Fi or whatever it is. But it is really not a very flat classroom, and that comes back to this issue of equity as well. Okay, but some things did work really well. And so I'm going to spend a little bit of time here. I'm close to the end, but again, I would encourage you to engage in the chat with things that you saw that you felt really worked well. And some of these are kind of the technical details of what worked well in the instantiation that I used, but I think there's some that are a little bit broader that I'll spend a minute or two on as well. So first of all, pre-lecture discussions had a very positive impact. I used a tool called Perusal, There are other tools out there. I don't know if many people have used Perusal. Again, you can weigh in the chat if you'd like to. But I found that Perusal was really a great, sorry about that, I keep clicking forward and I apologize. Perusal was a great tool. On average, the students spent a couple of hours reading one chapter a week and engaging through comments and annotations and questions to other students. I monitored that, but did not jump in. I let the students answer their own questions, and there was a tremendous amount of peer instruction that worked. And so that's something that I'll definitely go back to, and that's something that I have used in the past, but not with this particular tool, and not kind of enforced through my assessment practices. So that was a positive. And I see Chitra has her hand up, so let me take your question before I go on, while people perhaps read more of what's there. So Chitra, go ahead.
Yeah, I was really interested that you use Perusal. How much does it cost your students? Does the university subscribe to it?
The university does subscribe to it, and so the cost to students is zero. And so I used so that was obviously that made it easier for me to implement. But they've also worked with the university to implement Perusal through our learning management system. So it's really integrated in kind of a seamless way. And that, to me, those were conditions for me to use anything. I did not want the students to have to purchase a different tool. I did not want them to have to go to a different website. I wanted everything through our learning management system. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. And
Perusal really worked well. And also a shout out here to online and free textbooks. And I used free and online textbooks in both of my courses, and felt that was really essential as well, because I didn't want students to have to worry about physically getting their hands on a textbook. Okay, so that was a real positive. Another positive is that students appreciated the flexibility to reweight their assessments within some parameters. And they used that, and in fact, they used it beyond my wildest fears. And so I now have 600 students in one of my classes with about 400 different assessment weightings that I have to build into my final spreadsheet. But they certainly appreciated the flexibility. The at-home labs were a little bit of a mixed bag. On the one hand, unfortunately, the fact that there is very little feedback from TAs that are present there, in fact, no feedback, obviously, from TAs who are present there, but also not feedback from their peer group that they would normally work with in the labs, means that some of them basically went down rabbit holes for many, many hours. They would spend way more time than I thought was necessary for the labs. On the other hand, on the other end of the scale, some of them rose to the challenge and did really great work, experimental work at home, with just at-home supplies, and did very nice measurements in their labs. So that was really something that is a work in progress, but I think it's something I'm not going to give up, the idea of them just needing to do experimentation with what's at hand. The back channel participation in lectures through Zoom chat specifically was really very positive. I had monitors, so I had both mentors, undergraduate mentors, and TAs who looked at the chat, and this was really a fantastic way for students to interact without disturbing the flow of the lecture. Now, of course, I'm happy to take questions, as I did just a minute ago, but of course, many students are very reticent about raising their hand, especially in a large class. They worry that they are interrupting. They worry that their question is a little bit silly. They worry that their question, shows them to not have missed something. But they are much more willing to engage through the chat with my mentors and with my TAs. And of course, the mentors and TAs are then able to bring it to my attention if they see repeated questions along the same theme. So back channel participation, which I've tried to do in other instances, but not with, of course, pre-Zoom, was something that was really positive. The demos worked. These recorded demos worked, but they lacked the immediacy of the in-person demos. And I'll share an insight here, and that is that people are my students are much more engaged with the process of me doing a demo if they believe, A, that there's a possibility that my blood may flow, Or B, there is a possibility that, you know, I will do something silly. That is, I will, you know, miss the dart gun shot or bounce the basketball and hit myself, or, you know, something else. And of course, these demos didn't. These demos were, I filmed them so that they worked. So there was less engagement in that sense. But on the other hand, they were posted on the learning management system so students could watch them multiple times. And I think in the future, what I would do is actually have them do detailed analysis through image analysis software of some of the demos. And then finally, and this is something that I had completely not thought about. It had never crossed my mind that this would be the case. But we see our students when they do run their videos, and many of them did, and they see us when we are on Zoom like this in kind of a natural habitat. I know that many of my colleagues like to run backgrounds that are their lab, or you know, some scene from the Zoom background library. That's not me. This is my background. This is my son's room. He's away studying himself. And so this is where I gave my lectures from. Students noticed when I changed the piece of art on the wall. Some students noticed the Wu-Tang Clan poster of one of my son's you know, favorite bands. They engaged with us in a very human way, and I saw into their worlds as well. So the number of cats that I saw, stunning. I mean, seems like every second student has a pet cat. Okay, terrific. But you know, that's a little thing, but that builds a very human connection between us and them that they don't often see even in the university, in the in-person world, because of course they see me in an auditorium. They don't bring their pets to school. They don't see the artwork that my son has on the wall, etc. So this builds a very, very human connection. And actually, that's a nice segue into my very final slide. Well, actually my penultimate slide, but the final slide that has some thoughts that are important on it. And that is, I think that's the big positive but less tangible takeaway of this term. And that is that ironically, the move away from a personal engagement with our students has made it clear just how important that personal engagement is. And to me, the real fear was, and this is a fear actually that started several years ago when we started to record our lectures. I think many people said, well, as soon as we start to record our lectures, why am I doing this? Because there is somebody out there who does these lectures better. They can look them up online. They can get a Nobel Prize winner to explain whatever it is. And so what's my value added? And of course, you know, that didn't happen. Even though we record our lectures, people still come to our lectures. And even here, when we moved online, people didn't flock necessarily to the Khan Academy videos and all of the online material. They were still present. I had something like 70 to 75% attendance in my classes, at least as measured by the number of little black boxes. And why? The answer, of course, is that they're looking for this connection with a real instructor where they can ask questions, where we can go off topic, where they can ask ancillary questions and follow-up questions and things that aren't really connected, or maybe things that they don't think are connected and they want to ask me if there is a deeper connection. That real-time link between the instructor and the student is absolutely critical to what we do. And to me, not having that link has really reinforced how much that link is at the basis of what we do. So engaged and passionate instructors and engaged and motivated students need to interact, and they need to interact in person. And I think that is, to me, what this term has really taught me. So I'm going to close there, and but I do want to give thanks to a number of that is not the right way to say it, but I want to thank a number of people and groups. First of all, my colleagues at McGill, who always inspire me, and across the country through the Division of Physics Education at CAP. It's always inspiring to learn from you, with you about things. The people at TLS, Teaching and Learning Services, and the Office for Science and Education at McGill. And then, of course, I couldn't have done and taught these large classes for years without many fantastic teams of engaged TAs and engaged undergrad mentors, and they've really helped me, and I thank them very much. And then, of course, my long-suffering undergrad subjects. And here's a screenshot from one of the things they did in one of our final lectures, and you will notice that they, many of them have taken as their background a little squiggle, and that squiggle is the way I always talked about Newton. You've all seen Newton's powdered wig photos, and so whenever I invoke Newton and his laws, I draw this little squiggle, and one of the students put together all the squiggles I'd drawn and distributed it to them, and many of them used it as the background. So they were really engaged, and I thank them very much.